When my mom married Tom, I didn't know what to think. Everything about it felt strange at first, nothing like what I'd imagined a stepdad would be. He didn't fit the pictures I'd built in my head over the years. The tough, loud, always joking guy who'd ruffle my hair and play catch in the yard. Tom wasn't that. He was quiet, not shy exactly, just soft-spoken, careful with his words. He had this calm, patient energy, like nothing anyone said could shake him. And yet, there was always something just behind his eyes. A stillness or maybe a sadness. Most days he wore a kind smile, polite and kind, but it never quite reached all the way to his eyes. Not fully. Sometimes I used to catch myself wondering, was he happy here? Was he really this calm? Or was he pretending being the man my mom needed, because someone had to be? I didn't hate him, not even close, but I didn't trust him either, not right away. Honestly, it was just awkward. Tom didn't have any kids of his own, and I don't think he knew what he was supposed to do with someone like me. I didn't give him much to work with. I kept to myself, gave short answers when he asked stuff. He'd talk a little at dinner about some repair project or job update, and I'd nod, maybe say, cool, with a mouthful of food. He always seemed to be trying, like he was reaching out, one small piece at a time, but I wasn't sure I wanted to take his hand just yet. Mom, being newly married and always buried in work, was pulled in 100 directions that left Tom and me alone far more often than either of us probably expected. Sometimes it felt like we were two separate pieces trying to fit in the same box, not clashing exactly, but just existing quietly across the room from one another. Watching, waiting, trying to figure it out. It started to shift, not all at once, just slowly. I noticed the little things first. When Mom was working early, Tom would make my favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs, with way too much cheese. He kind of overcooked them at first, but I pretended not to care. He'd ask about school before I retreated to my room, and when I gave him more than a one-word answer, he actually listened. Not just nodded, listened. It felt strange, but in a weird way, kind of warm too. I wasn't used to adults listening without judging, without trying to fix me or turn my words into advice. Then came the night everything felt a little different. Mom got called in for an emergency at work, so it was just me and Tom at home for dinner. I remember walking into the kitchen and stopping short when I saw what he was cooking. "Looks like it's just you and me tonight, huh?" he said, setting forks on the table. "Pretty sure you like lasagna. Hope I didn't burn it this time." I smirked. "I'll be the judge of that." It wasn't the world's funniest joke, but it was ours. There was a memory behind that line. A while back, he'd attempted lasagna from scratch, and it had come out droopy and half-cooked. We both pretended it was edible that night. Barely. We sat down, at first. Just the sounds of plates and utensils scraping. Quiet bites, light chewing. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Hey, how's school going? I don't think we've talked about it much." He had asked before, but something about this time felt different. Like he wasn't just trying to make conversation. Like he really wanted to know. I responded without thinking. "It's okay, I guess." He tilted his head. "What does okay mean? You getting by all right? Need help with anything?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep that wall up, but something in his voice, it wasn't pushy or fake. It was just real. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I let my guard slip. I started talking about how school was overwhelming, how some days I felt invisible, how everyone felt like they had a place but me, how it was exhausting trying to pretend like everything was fine when it really wasn't. Tom didn't interrupt, didn't offer useless advice, just nodded, let me speak, let me be. We kept talking quietly late into the night. No big revelations or emotional outbursts, just words, real ones. And by the time we were rinsing our plates in the sink, the silence between us had changed. It wasn't stiff anymore, it was easy, peaceful even. Something had started that evening, not loudly. Nothing flashy, but enough, in the weeks, and then months that followed, the awkward gaps between us shrank. We still weren't exactly best buddies. There were no grand, heartwarming father-son moments that ended with hugs in the driveway or jokes at sunrise. But we had something else, a rhythm. He still made breakfast on weekends. I started helping, sometimes setting the plates, peeling potatoes if he needed it. It felt normal, surprisingly good. We'd pass each other in the hallway and swap small jokes, or we'd sit in the same room and just exist. No pressure, no performance. The house felt calmer like that. Our shared quiet became a kind of comfort. One Saturday morning, I sat with my books open on the kitchen table, trying to finish an assignment. The smell of garlic drifted from the stove. Tom was trying something new again. I think it's eggs with something garlicky. I muttered mostly to myself, nose wrinkling. He didn't laugh, just smiled, and I noticed he was watching me then, his gaze lingering a second longer than usual before looking away, back to the pan. "You doing okay?" he asked more softly. I nodded, and maybe I did mean it, but the truth was I didn't really know. Teenage life was too messy to label. Still, he didn't push. He just flipped something in the pan that popped with oil, served me a plate without asking, and sat down across from me. He gave me warmth, not just through food, but through presence. Not a replacement for something I lost. Not the hero I told myself I didn't need. Just him, trying, showing up, every day. The world didn't change overnight. I still struggled with school, with who I was, with where I fit. But Tom became a steady part of my life, one small gesture at a time. And somehow, over time, he stopped being Tom and became something else entirely. Not just a nice man in the kitchen. Not just the husband who loved my mom, but a figure whose presence felt like home. Not because he tried to be my dad, but because, slowly and quietly, he became one anyway. Gesture his quiet, understanding the way he didn't push me for answers more, made me feel closer to him, more than just a stepfather, more than just a man living in the house with us. It was starting to feel like something deeper, something I hadn't expected. "Thanks," I said, picking up my fork. "This looks good." "Good, I'm glad you like it." He replied, smiling, but not saying anything more. There was something in his smile, though, a kind of warmth that made me feel like he really cared, even if he didn't have all the answers. We ate in silence, the noise of the house outside this little bubble of calm. It wasn't uncomfortable, it wasn't forced, it was just natural. But it was also more than that, and I could feel it, though I didn't quite know what to make of it. There was a growing sense of trust, of companionship in those small moments. I realized then that Tom had become someone I relied on in a way I hadn't allowed myself to admit. Not just for the little things like breakfast or fixing things around the house, but for the quiet comfort of knowing that he was there without needing words to explain it. At times, I found myself wanting to talk to him more, to share the things that had been weighing on me, things I wasn't sure how to say to Mom. But when I'd open my mouth, I'd hesitate. There was always that tiny voice in the back of my head telling me to keep the distance, to not get too close, because after all he was still my stepfather, and there were lines that couldn't be crossed. But no matter how much I tried to keep things at arm's length, something about him, the way he listened, the way he treated me, kept pulling me in. And so the days passed, and I found myself spending more time around him. I noticed how easy it was to talk to him about the little things, schoolwork, random facts, the books I was reading. It wasn't deep, but it was enough to make me feel like we shared something, even if I wasn't entirely sure what it was. One evening after dinner, when the house was quiet and Mom had gone to bed early for work, Tom and I sat in the living room. I was curled up with my book, and he was watching some documentary on TV. Though I could tell he wasn't paying much attention, we were both lost in our thoughts, our small corner of silence. I couldn't help but steal a glance at him now and then, noticing how his expression softened when he thought no one was looking. It was moments like these that made me realize he wasn't just trying to be a good stepfather anymore. Somewhere along the way, I think we had become something more to each other, something unspoken, unacknowledged. But undeniably, there I still wasn't sure how I felt about it. I didn't know where this was heading, but I knew that something had shifted between us, and that shift felt significant. It wasn't until winter came that things began to shift in a way I hadn't anticipated. The days grew shorter, and the air outside turned crisp, but inside the house felt warmer, more alive. Maybe it was the holidays approaching, or maybe it's just the way things had quietly changed between Tom and me. But I started to feel a sense of something more real, more tangible. Mom had been working late again. Her usual hours stretched even longer as she tried to juggle the responsibilities of her job and home. As the holiday season drew nearer, she became more distracted, more distant, leaving Tom and me alone together more often than usual. It wasn't a problem at first. In fact, I welcomed it. Our usual routine, Tom cooking, me quietly observing, both of us exchanging the occasional joke or a smile, had become a comforting part of my days. But one evening just before Christmas, I noticed something different, something I couldn't quite place at first, but it lingered in the air between us like a tension that hadn't been there before. It was late, and we had just finished cleaning up after dinner. Tom was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV. I was supposed to be doing my homework, but the words on the page wouldn't stay still. My mind kept wandering. I glanced over at him, watching as he absent-mindedly rubbed his forehead, the lines of exhaustion faintly visible across his face. He'd been working so hard, and I wondered if it was the stress of the holidays or something else that was wearing on him. "Tom," I said, my voice soft. "Are you okay?" He glanced up, surprised. "Yeah, just a little tired," he replied, offering a smile that seemed more strained than usual. He was trying to hide it, I could tell, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet sadness that hadn't been there before, I can tell. I said, setting my homework aside, "You don't seem like yourself lately." He chuckled softly, the sound a little too sharp to be genuine. "And it's nothing, just the usual work stuff." I didn't press further. I wasn't sure why, but I felt like I was stepping into territory I wasn't meant to explore. Even so, I couldn't help but notice how much he'd changed since that first awkward dinner we had together. The connection between us, subtle at first, had grown stronger, deeper. I could talk to him now about things I couldn't share with anyone else, things I hadn't even shared with Mom. Still, there were things I couldn't bring myself to say. I was afraid that if I said them out loud, it would change everything, that it would break fragile understanding we had built over time. When I looked back at Tom, he was staring out the window, his gaze distant. He hadn't noticed I was watching him. Something in the way he looked at the world beyond that window, almost longing, almost lost, stirred something in me. I felt an odd kind of empathy for him in that moment, an understanding of how lonely he must feel sometimes, even though he was surrounded by people who cared. I stood up and walked over to the couch, sitting down beside him. At first, neither of us spoke, but then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, I leaned my head on his shoulder. I didn't know why I did it. It wasn't something I had planned it. It wasn't even something I had been consciously thinking about, but in that moment it felt right. He tensed, and I could feel it, but only for a moment. His body softened after a few seconds, and he didn't pull away. I could feel the warmth of his body, the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, and it was the most peaceful I had felt in a long time. "Thanks for everything, Tom," I whispered, not sure if he heard me or not. For a long time he didn't say anything. He just sat there, his arm gently resting against mine, neither of us breaking the silence. I could hear the sound of the clock ticking in the background, a constant reminder of time moving forward. Yet in that moment it felt like time had stopped altogether. It felt like we were in a small bubble, away from everything away from the world, away from the uncertainties and complexities of our lives. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You don't have to thank me for that." I wanted to say more, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, my eyes growing heavy as the warmth of the room settled over me. The unspoken connection between us had become stronger, more undeniable. I was beginning to realize that in some ways I was relying on him more than I had ever allowed myself to admit, and as much as I tried to ignore it, I knew that it wasn't just because he was my stepfather. There was something deeper. Something I wasn't ready to name, let alone understand. As I drifted off to sleep on the couch beside him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. It was when winter arrived that I realized everything had begun to shift. The days grew shorter, and the outside air became cold, but inside the house felt warmer, more alive. Maybe it was because the holidays were approaching, or maybe it was just the way things had slowly changed between Tom and me. But I started to feel something deeper, something more real. Mom had been staying late at work, more often than usual, but this time I could feel the distance between us growing. She was distracted, absorbed in her responsibilities, leaving Tom and me alone together. More than ever, it wasn't a problem at first. In fact, I even welcomed it. Our usual routine, Tom cooking me quietly, watching both of us, sharing the occasional joke or smile, had become a comfortable part of my days. But one evening, just before Christmas, I noticed something different. It wasn't that anything had changed on the surface, but there was a strange, unspoken tension in the air, a quiet weight that hadn't been there before. It was late, and we had just finished cleaning up after dinner. Tom was sitting in the living room, flipping through TV channels. I should have been doing my homework, but my mind wouldn't focus. I kept thinking about everything, about school, about Mom, about everything. I glanced over at him. He was staring out the window, his brow furrowed as if lost in thought. Sea was gone, replaced by something heavier. I couldn't quite figure it out, but I could tell he was troubled. "Tom," I said, my voice quiet, "are you okay?" He looked up, startled, and then quickly tried to mask his expression with a smile. "Yeah, just a little tired," he said, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Work's been busy." I nodded, but I could tell it was more than that. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he avoided looking at me directly, that made me feel like he was carrying something heavy inside. I didn't push him, but I couldn't help but notice the change. There was an emptiness there now that hadn't existed before, and as much as I hated to admit it, I felt it too. Something had shifted between us. Something subtle, something unspoken, but it was real. We sat in silence for a while, the room growing colder with the absence of words. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I couldn't take it anymore. My thoughts were running in circles, and I didn't know how to stop them. I stood up and walked over to where he was sitting, a strange impulse pushing me forward. When I reached him, I sat down next to him on the couch, just a few inches away. We didn't say anything. We just sat there side by side, as if we were waiting for something to happen. Then, without thinking, I leaned my head on his shoulder. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't something I planned. But as soon as I did it, I realized that it felt right in a way I couldn't explain. For a moment, he stiffened, his body going rigid. Then he didn't pull away. Instead, he relaxed just a little, and I felt his warmth against me. He didn't say anything for a long time, and neither did I. The quiet hung in the air between us, thick with things unsaid. The only sound was the steady rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. I could feel his presence more intense than ever, but at the same time, it was like everything else had faded away. "Thank you for everything, Tom. She is the voice in the wilderness," whispered my voice, barely audible. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he simply placed his hand on mine gently. There was no rush, no immediate need to break the moment. He just let it linger, like he was waiting for me to say more, or maybe like he was waiting for himself to find the words to respond. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice low and careful. "You don't have to thank me for that. I wanted to say more. I wanted to explain how much this all meant to me, how much he had come to mean to me, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come in." That moment I realized how much I had come to rely on him, how much I needed him more than I had ever allowed myself to admit. But I also knew something else. This couldn't continue. This couldn't go any further. The sound of the front door opening suddenly broke the silence. It was Mom coming home from work. We both froze, startled, as she stepped into the living room. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes scanning the room. I was searching for some sign of what had happened. Tom quickly stood up, stepping back. As if nothing had changed, I stayed seated on the couch, my heart racing. Unsure of what to do, Mom looked at both of us, and for a moment I thought she might see it, the distance between us, the unspoken tension. But she didn't. She just glanced between us, sensing something was off, but not quite able to pinpoint what it was. "Everything's fine," Tom said, his voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. Mom didn't press further, but I could tell she felt the change, even if she didn't know exactly what it was. She dropped her bag on the floor and moved to the kitchen, leaving the two of us in an uncomfortable silence. As she walked away, I realized that this moment, this strange, complicated moment, was the turning point. Things could never go back to how they were before. Not for me, not for Tom, not for any of us. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how to fix it, or if it could be fixed at all. But I knew one thing for sure: my mom would have to make a choice. She didn't know it yet, but she would have to choose between me and Tom, between what she wanted and what was real, and I wasn't sure who she would choose.